Welcome to this special school committee meeting of November 13th, 2023. I would like to call the roll, please. Mr. O'Connell.
Here.
Mayor Broder.
Here.
Ms. Rosie Thomas.
Here.
Ms. DeSelm.
Here.
Ms. Withy.
Here.
Ms. McAndrew.
Here.
And I am Margaret Driscoll. I'm the chair, and I am also here. We are a full committee tonight, so I do declare a quorum, and I would invite us to stand as we are able to say the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight, it's our great pleasure to welcome our first superintendent finalist candidate, Dr. Jannell Pearson-Campbell. Tonight's framework we will invite Dr. Pearson-Campbell to start with just a couple of minutes of opening remarks. We'll go into our questions. I'll start with the questions and proceed around the horseshoe with Ms. McAndrew next. So about 4 minutes maybe for answers for those questions, and then we'll have closing remarks for a couple of minutes, and then we will thank you for being with us tonight. It's been such a long day. So with that, I would invite you to share with us some initial thoughts.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My day started at 8:30, and I met from building administrators, classroom teachers, community members regarding the Melrose Public Schools. And what my essential thought was that everyone from parents are really concerned about what the school look like for all of their students. And today, in my last meeting, I met with the Metco parents who were concerned about their students. But also, I heard from the union members today about how do we bring collaborative together on behalf of that. And so my background, a little bit about myself, I was the interim superintendent for Northampton Public Schools. And one of the things that I had to balance was looking at a budget that had a deficit and really thinking about how to build programs underneath that. But also, in addition to that, really thinking about how do you bring programs of excellence and at the same time maintaining staff. Because when you have a budget, you really want to ensure that you have quality staff in front of the students. And so as I matriculate today, I explained to everyone I am a special ed teacher that happened to be worked my way up to assistant director of special ed, and now and also to assistant superintendent. So with those three viewpoints, you really think about how to bring programs at the same time as you move forward. And so I know today, hopefully throughout the questions, you'll be able to hear my philosophy about ensuring that all students are prepared for college and career readiness. And one of the things I met with the students today, they even asked for a class about budgeting. They said, I don't know how to balance a checkbook. And they really want to know real-world explorations. And I said, as a superintendent, I really would like to hear from them for their perspective. So you have great students who are really concerned about their education. So today was my opportunity to visit today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll lead off with, based on maybe some of the reflections you've had or something else, why Melrose and why now?
Well, one of my reflections is that you have a team of educators and community members who are ensuring that all members of the community feel supported. And in addition to that, what does equity look like in the district, and really having thoughtful conversations to move forward. And one of the things that I've learned today is that you're constantly reviewing to build a rigorous education, at the same time balancing the budget. So why now? I bring in skill sets to really look at a data per se for a budget, but also to looking at programs to ensure all students are prepared. And so as my previous explanation, I was assistant director of special ed, where I connected programs from kindergarten to high school and looking at programs to ensure that all students are feeling supported by using data. Looking at curriculum, bringing people together from teachers, building principals, directors, assistant superintendents, and union to look at what curriculum do we have. So not from a bottom up, because you want to look at the end users, which are our teachers, to ensure that we're supporting all our members. So I feel like I can lead the district, but most importantly, what I heard today was we want somebody to bring us together because we've gone through some difficult challenges, and in order to move together, we need somebody to bring us collaboratively on behalf of kids, and I think that's my skill set.
Beautiful, thank you. And before we go to Ms. McAndrew, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that this meeting is being recorded, and it's being televised live by our friends at MMTV. The recording will be released after all of our superintendent finalist candidates have visited with us. Ms. McAndrew.
Thank you so much. Dr. Pearson-Campbell, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending the day in our district with our students and educators and administrators. It's really wonderful to have you here. And thank you for engaging earlier today in the community forum as well. I want to ask you a question about problem solving and your approach to problem solving. As you know better than anyone, there's no shortage of challenges facing any superintendent in the Commonwealth right now. Hiring and retaining a diverse and well-supported staff, as you mentioned, providing an excellent and inclusive education for all students, managing enrollment growth, something we're doing here in Melrose, skyrocketing costs around transportation. You could probably give us a long list of challenges. But what I'm interested in is your approach to problem solving. And so I'm wondering if you could please offer a few concrete examples of when you've brought creative thinking or new approaches to a tough problem or challenge.
So one of the problems that we had was our English language learners were not performing on grade level material. And so one of the things for the problem solving that I did do was to put together a team, but look at data analysis. And so, for example, you have your iReady data, you have your Department of Ed Edwin data, and so you come together and say, okay, let's look at the data from the performance for each grade level. And the creative piece, when you're looking at monetarily, you're saying, okay, how do we have time for staff to look at the data? Because if you look at your calendar, you have 2-hour windows, but sometimes it could be union-driven or school-driven. So one of the things that I have done is really put together more of an online piece where it's both during face-to-face and also online, so that during different time periods that people can look at the data together at hybrid times, because there's not enough time during the day to do all the initiatives, but we use the different technology pieces. In addition to that, looking at what resources that are free. So if money is limited, there's some sites out there, Standard Navigator, that are free, that we can look at it per se. Also, being creative is how the staff will look at data. So one of the things that I did do was create an interactive PowerPoint. So if you're new to looking at data, it shows you, click here. This is how to get onto the site. This is the next step, how to look at the standards, how do you look at the subgroups. Because you only have 2 hours looking at the schedule, but you can also put that together where they can look at on their free time or during their planning time, that they can look at from that piece. Because there's so many initiatives, but you really want to use that in order for that. That's the first example. But the second example is working with the Department of Ed, had a grant called the Celebration Roadmap. Because, after the pandemic, the amount of time students were not in front of teachers, we looked at the Celebration Roadmap, and Department of Ed had this grant, and that allowed teachers to create interactive opportunities that wasn't a typical school programming. So they included some science opportunities where they can do hands-on materials, and also too, it was during their time, and it was throughout the year. So that every school breaks, that would allow students to have the time to review the information from that using the Acceleration Roadmap from the grant. So being creative of sitting down with classroom teachers, building administrative time so that they can plan a unit for the year. And what you saw in the following year when the data came out, you saw growth, because it wasn't just a one and done after school activity. It was an entire year or two that focused on closing the achievement gap, raising the level of expectation, and acceleration to learning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Withy.
Great.
I want to also just echo my colleagues in saying thank you for spending the entire day with the district and giving us the opportunity to get to know you a little bit more. It's been a pleasure. With that being said, I would love to just take a moment to hear a little bit, based on what you've learned thus far, what would your top 3 objectives be for Melrose? And if you have time to explain, I'd love to hear how would you plan to address that top objective you name?
Number one, looking at the budget to ensure that programming is in place for the future. I think about it in a 5-year window. The second piece is teaching and learning, ensuring that it supports all students and learners throughout the district. The third piece is sense of belonging, so that every student and family feel that they're supported when they come in. Now, when you talk about the budget, it's also what the educational impact, so it connects to your teaching and learning. And so one of the things that to me is very important is putting in a process so that when September is the opening of schools, and by that time you'll have data from the MCAS analysis, from AP exam, et cetera. But you can plug in when it comes to October, looking at that budget per se, how do you have programs so that you looking at the classroom size, your interventionists, you also too looking at programs as you move forward. But you have to sit down, think of it thoughtfully in order to move forward. And then when you come in front of the school committee, you really want to have a plan that's saying, this is the budget, but this is how that we're going to provide opportunities for our teachers, our students, and our staff. Because you also have to think about a plan, a 5-year window to grow the programming. And the way that you look at the budget, you can say, what can our budget support? And also to what does grant funding support in order to move forward? So for example, when I look at grants like Title I and Title II, you can look at it from developing professional development time so that you're still moving forward, but you're also using other resources to as you go forward. Because money is, sometimes you have to do what free things that we can use.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. DeSalle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome again. Excuse me. Excuse me, sorry. What does culturally and linguistically sustaining practices mean to you? And how do you promote these values in your leadership style? And how would you demonstrate that across the district?
Most culturally means looking at the student's background and focusing into school. And so one of the things I can share as an example is looking at different scientists, how people's learning experiences into the school. So one of the examples I can provide for you is that I did a Black History Month calendar that included scientists, authors, and not the typical Martin Luther King, but so the kids can understand there's other contributors. So each month you bring in different societal scientists into that program. And when you talk about linguistically, there's a program when part of, if a student is identified as an English language learner, they have to take what you call the access test. And the access test identifies the student speaking, listening, writing, and you want to see how is that being implemented into a classroom. Mm-hmm. And there, when you take the access score, you also look at can-do descriptors. It's very intense, so that this has a plan, part of that. And so you look at those, and that it's being implemented throughout the year when you look at the standards and the inclusive opportunities. So for a teacher who's going to say, I have different learning styles of culturally and linguistically, the way that is can be implemented by looking at professional development time so that teachers have time to plan their lessons. There's also opportunities where they have stipend opportunities so that they can build professional development from that so that it can build over time. Those things that I have done, and hopefully that every teacher has taken there's a support for ELL, Students for Teachers. If you have a student in your classroom, these are supports that you have. So one of the things that I would do as a superintendent, just to identify what teachers have taken the licensure for that or have gotten the certification for that in order to improve upon that. But those are things that I have done.
Very good, thank you.
Welcome. Ms. Rossi Thomas.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Dr. Pearson-Campbell. I have a question for you that's more of a reflection question. what have you learned over the last few years of scrutiny on public education in general and superintendents specifically on how to make change strategically and steadily? What would you need from this school committee, the community and educators along the journey to make some changes? And how do you think about that now? If you can reflect on something that you were like, oh, I wish I had kind of done it this way instead of that way, because the time that we live in right now, there's so much scrutiny on superintendents. Thank you.
Well, I have the additional layer, so I always think about any message that I bring out to the community when it talks about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And a lot of times when you hear diversity, equity, inclusion, people think it's about race, but when it's really about ensuring that all members of the community feel supported. And so one of the things I, as an essential office leader, when we were talking about curriculum and reading materials, that one of the things that I had to do is think about what plans are in place to ensure that, for example, reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry was written in 1970 later, and it had a lot of racial undertones in there. And one of the things that I had to do was work with a team who were white educators to feel that they were supported. And one of the things, when this union wrote back to me and said, why are you putting this plan in place? And I said, you want to make sure that your staff feel supported when you read a very difficult book in place. And so it was an email that she sent to me, and so one of the things that if I had to do in hindsight, I would say, come sit down and let's have a conversation of why that plan wasn't put in place in order to support your staff. And the book was read, a letter was sent out, but the union, felt during that conversation of why am I scrutinizing the book that they're reading. And I just said, in order to be safe, because one of your members sent out, we're reading this book, how are you going to support the N-word? And I had to go back and say, where we support the N-word, we're not going to say the N-word, we're going to say N-word. If the student has a special ed and it's an auditory book, then someone will have to read, because we were thinking thoughtfully. The book was written in a certain time, and it was okay during that time, but this is 2020, 21 or 22. And the visuals that they were sending out was very harsh. And I said, let's take a step back before we send those visuals there. You still can read a culturally sensitive book, but you just have to think about a plan in place. So that was my part.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Broder.
Good evening, Doctor. We met very briefly at the meet and greet this afternoon. It is a pleasure to see you again. You mentioned, I think, both at that and maybe in your remarks earlier, about college and career readiness. I am a believer that that is an important metric of judging how well we are succeeding as a district. I don't think everyone necessarily subscribes to that philosophy, so I'm wondering if you could flesh that out a bit, and maybe more generally, if there is there's no single factor, but if you could point to a single thing that you would point to as growth or district success that we could kind of share with the community, share with the world, what would that be?
Number one, looking at MCAS to find a subgroup to show that there is a closure of the achievement gap. And because sometimes community members need to see, like, these programs have an effect on all of our students. And then the second piece, with looking at how many students are enrolled in AP, pre-AP courses so that they could enroll in AP overall. There is a data source that when you go online, you can identify what students are enrolled in that. And they say that when a student is enrolled to an AP course, it helps them with being successful in college. And I always explain to people that once they leave high school, what do those skills look like? And so one of the things that I have done is really put together, work with various members and saying, what skills are we expecting students to have when they leave that grade level and preparing for college and career readiness? And also working with the business community to say these are the skills for writing, communicating, because right now you see kids on the phone. there's some certain etiquette that they have to know, like you have to put down the phone, you got to greet somebody. Those are college and career readiness that we don't really talk about, but it's those skills from there. I was talking today to my group of group of 8 students who are high school students, and I said, what is your plan for once you leave here? And they said, I don't know. And I said, well, you know, are you going off to college? What are your expectations? What does it look like? And that's when they started talking about, well, I wish we talked about budgeting. And I said, well, have you ever heard of NFTE, National Foundations Teaching Entrepreneurship? Because that is also preparing you to look at your skills as a business as you move forward. And they said, well, we haven't talked about that. So to me, one of the most important things I've heard today was really having an open communication with the students so that they have a conversation with the superintendent, but other members of the community, so that, because they're asking for it. They asked me today, like, you know, we're taking all these classes, but I wish we had something about real-world opportunities. And so those are things to me that's very important. Because I didn't come into education right out of college. I started as a pharmacy major and finished as health information management, so I have that real-world experience. So when I entered education, I always think about when kids leave Melrose, what it's going to look like and how they prepare for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doctor, my question comes under the heading of meeting the needs of all students. As superintendent, how will you maintain a close relationship with students, and what strategies will you use to keep in touch with the realities of daily student life?
I like to visit classrooms and buildings. It's nothing like going to see a classroom and seeing what it takes to be a teacher. Because if you're in the office all the time as a superintendent, you miss that interaction. And I like when I went into the classroom today, the kids were like, who are you? Why are you here? Why are you visiting? And it makes you realize why you do this job. And to continue having, at each school, having meeting times that you can meet with the students either in cafeteria or walking through the building, that is very important. And part of my scheduling time, working with my executive assistant, is really having times that I'm in the building. I like to be scheduled to either start my day in a school or end my day in a school, because then you can think about programs, you can think about hearing from the teachers, because they might not be able to come to central office, but you come to them, be part of the process. But one of the things I also have done in my experience is I have office hours in each building, so they know that I'm coming in maybe once a month to hear their concerns, and then I have my rolling cart, my computer, so I'm interacting with staff, because I think that's very important, and with students.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. The superintendent is, in essence, the CEO of the school district. Can you please share what key responsibilities you see fall into the CEO role? And if you could please give an example of how you would prioritize the roles of the CEO in Melrose.
To me, being the CEO is having a vision and a mission of the district. So my vision is to ensure that all students are prepared for college and career readiness. And what does that look like? Having professional development for teachers and building administrators that we're constantly learning, and looking at data analysis. So for example, I started looking at your website. I also looked at Department of Ed. I also looked at your tier focus review to see what initiatives are going on in the district and how to move forward. But in addition to that, having set meeting times with all the department heads so you can understand what's going on in the building to have a plan. When you think about a CEO, they have an entry plan into the district so that you'll be able to collect data so you know like what are the priorities. So for example, the priorities about the budget, but also what does teaching and learning look like to support all learners. And in addition to that, how do you communicate to the community, have a constant communication process so that everyone knows what's going on. And so my experience have been constantly sending communication out to the community, being visible into the community, because the CEO is like you're the walking salesperson. When you walk down the street or go to the grocery store or be into the event, you're constantly saying, this is what's going on in Melrose. How do you bring all the different entities in there so that you're moving forward? So those are things that I have done.
Thank you. Ms. McAndrew.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Thank you. On to round two here. My question is about collective bargaining and unions. Educational leaders at your level all have deep and broad experience with contract negotiations and collaborating with educators within the frameworks of collective bargaining. So my question is about your philosophy and strategies in that pillar of a superintendent's work. How do you think about the labor management relationship, and how do you productively build and sustain those relationships in ways that strengthen the school community and serve all students?
Today I met some of the union representatives, and one of the most important things is communication and having an open dialogue. And the key thing too is to read all of the contracts. Since you have different administrators, you make sure they read it too, that they follow the contract too. One of the most important things that I have done, because when you, the CEO, the superintendent, you're working with all of the unions and their contracts. So one of the things that I have done, either have an MOA, which means to be sure understanding if the job has changed since the contract has written, connect with the union where I have monthly meetings with them so that I can hear the concerns of all the unit components. And if there are some concerns before that monthly meeting, pick up the phone or email and say, will you have some time, because I know you're in the class teaching, I would like to have a conversation with you. I can say, as a superintendent, last year I had 3 building administrators that I had to fill. And one of the things that I did do was I was in each building, and I sat with each teacher to say, what do you like about the candidate? They had different candidates coming in. So that there was a partnership, because you do not want to put somebody in a building that builds a very fractural relationship. So I value the members of the schools and all their different union components and from that. But working with the union is a constant day-to-day piece, and you want to hear their concerns. So it's a constant conversation.
Thank you.
Great.
Ms. Withey.
Thank you. I think you've talked a little bit about this, but would love to just go a little bit deeper. How does an effective superintendent generate and or sustain trust in their school system with the community? I'd love for you to provide an example of your current work so we could learn more.
So when I entered Northampton, the superintendent left, but we also had 5 key people leaving. And one of the things that I did do, the first thing I had office hours. Because when a superintendent leaves, you have an emotional, I had people crying. And they would come into my office because they was just an anxiety level, and just to build that piece of trust. But the other component was being visible. People want to know, are you going to be in the trenches with them, if there's a shortage of staff? There's times where I've been the administrative assistant or secretary, and a lot of times people don't know who I am. They're like, make sure you get the toilet paper. And I'm like, yes, I'll remind them, being a part of the conversation pieces, but also being visible. This job is about being visible and listening to people. One of the things I asked when I designed professional development, I asked the staff, what are you looking for professional development, so that we can include your thoughts into any programs, because it's really about, I call it the boots on the ground. How are they dealing? What policies from the school committee or from the Department of Ed is affecting them? And so that has built trust over time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeSalle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is around the MCAS. I would like to dig a little bit deeper into your views on the MCAS, especially in light of the discussions you've had with the high schoolers around lacking knowledge around, say, balancing the checkbook, something you've mentioned a couple times today. Teachers often have tight timelines, and oftentimes these life skills don't fit within the curriculum. So I'd like to understand how you would approach teaching these life skills, having your staff teach these life skills while still maintain the rigorous curriculum that we have to adhere to by state law.
One of the most important things that I have learned over time is how do you design a strong curriculum map so that students be exposed to standards, but also to real-world applications. I still believe that you need an assessment. It might not be an MCAS, but you need an assessment just to gauge to see how the students are matriculating on the standards. You do have iReady, and you do have dibbles for reading. So you still could have that component, but you really have to have time for teachers to think about how is that lesson being developed. And one of the things that I have done in my career is really giving teachers time to plan the lessons versus the standards, and looking at different assessments so that they have time overall. In addition, looking at other types of curriculum instruction materials that support the learner. One of I call it fundamentals. I ask staff to identify the curriculum that they're using and what does the standard look like in that curriculum. Because sometimes you see a worksheet that doesn't match to the standard. So when teachers say, I might not have the time, I said, well, let's before school starts, or looking at timing to see how are the materials being used in that classroom so that it can be used over time. And those are things that I have done by really looking at, having staff to look at the standards, having them look at the materials to make sure that give students the opportunity of being for rigorous at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rosie Thomas.
Thank you. I love that you mentioned that you heard kind of over and over again, and with different populations that you were meeting with today, that we need someone who can bring us together. Given that that's what the need is here in Melrose, I'm not going to disagree with you in any way. How do you also address teacher burnout and difficulty with hiring and retaining staff given labor shortages right now? So how can you do all that at the same time?
It's a balancing act, but one of the things that I always believe in the process of honestly scheduling for the year so that people can balance their schooling, their family lives at the same time. There's a balancing act, but also what opportunities that we can bring people together to support students. And so one of the things that I have done is looking at new teacher preparation programs so that you can hire new staffing coming in so that they can build over time. Because we are having what you call a staffing shortage of people not coming into the education per se, but I also say this is an opportunity to open up the opportunity for people saying this is a great field to come into. And one of the things I have done is that through the Department of Ed, they have what you call teacher prep programs that can be connected to your school district from that. But I also believe that you have to model so that people do not get burnt out. Because if I burn out my administrators, then they're going to burn out the staffing, and it goes trickle-down approach. And so one of the things that I have done is really plan each month, what does it look like, and provide to the building administrator to say, it might take you a whole month to focus on a school improvement plan or focus on how to support all members, but it's thoughtfully around that. Because sometimes you have so many initiatives going at the same time that people burn out. And I bring it down to some of the fundamentals. It's a teaching and learning cycle, very, very simple. What is the standard are you teaching? What are your essential questions? What are your vocab? What's your assessment? How are you supporting all learners? That teaching and learning cycle. And also look at what does your schedule look like for ELA, reading, and math, so that you chunk it over time. You're not going to go through all the standards in one month, but throughout the year that you support that and to model that time.
Thank you.
Mayor Broder.
Okay, I'm up again, Doctor. So you had an opportunity to interact a bit with our students, it sounds like, and that is awesome. That is, after all, what we're doing here, right? I'm wondering a bit about student voice and how you, at all levels, from the younger kids, a little bit of a different situation, but particularly as kids get older, how do we encourage them to, be participants in their education, to voice their concerns like they've done to you, and even for things that are going on outside the building, right? We have seen things, the world's a challenging place, and people have strong emotions about various issues that sometimes spills into the classroom. The good news about that is that it shows students are engaged but it can be tricky to manage in a learning environment. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about how to best create opportunities for all kids, not just the kids that are kind of the usual suspects, the kids that might not always take advantage of that, but feel like they do have an opportunity to be heard. How do we do that?
So in your district, you have assistant superintendent of PBIS, and you think about those supports, those social emotional learning components in that, but also provide training for our people who support our staff throughout the day. One of the things that I have done is each school had a social emotional committee, and each month they had an activity for a student to feel engaged in. So it could be an art wall, it could be a poem wall. There's also working with the outside agencies so that every student had someone they could go to support that. And as a superintendent, you look at your budget per se to see what is our therapist supports do we have, how do we work with outside agencies so that students have some money to go to. Because to me, it's not just the superintendent, but everybody that has training how to support all the members from that. My experience is also visiting schools. I like to be the guest reader, so kids get used to seeing me, and that they begin to start talking and talking to me and start, things from that. As a middle school and upper level, having a student advisory group so that they know that the superintendent's coming in during the lunchtime period, sitting there having lunch with them, so they feel that there's somebody that they can connect to. Because today when I met with the students, they really were saying that these are the things that we're looking for, is looking for somebody to connect to make sure that we have a supportive environment as we go on. But one of the things most importantly is just being invisible, and so the kids can see you out through the community, not just seeing you in the office or an email or Zoom, that you're part of the community, because kids like a connection.
Sound like leading by example is basically what it is. Joanna, thank you. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one's under the heading of teaching and learning and planning for the future. What are the kinds of things that you want our current kindergartners to know 12 years from now?
Kindness, number one. There's like a Dollar Tree sign, what you learn in kindergarten, some of those fundamental skills, because when you're kindness, it can open so many doors for you in the future, but also how to work together as a group collaboratively so that some of your classmates may not look like you, but they know how to work together. Also how to do problem solving, how to break apart a problem, or giving a puzzle, like a typical big puzzle. Say, okay, all of you get together, each of you have a puzzle, let's put it together so they can see that works together from that piece. Because what you learn in kindergarten will help you as an adult. Because I think sometimes we have to have people go back to kindergarten to learn how to play with one another, how to talk to one another. To me, it's very important.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you share how you have or how you would form a professional board of directors, a group you can depend on to provide you quality, honest feedback regardless of its support or its criticism of you? And can you explain a little bit about what kinds of people might be on it and give an example of how you've done it or how you would do it?
To me, it's building a board of directors. You want someone who is not a yes person, who you build that trust from that. What I have done in the past, I worked with community members. For example, I'm part of the Kiwanis Club, so every Thursday I will go to Kiwanis and sit there and have my soda and chicken and whatever, and we talk about the issues that's going on for part of the directors. Also working with having a mentor who sees you through the process and comes to the meetings to give you feedback along the way. In addition to your central office staff, that they feel that you build a relationship that they are providing you honest feedback, because that's the only way that you can move forward. Working with parent organizations, so special ed department, ELL department, CPAC, so that because they really understand like what's going on in their child per se, and also having a student from different grade levels, from elementary, middle, and high school, from the various schools, so that they'll be part of it in the PTO. But the reason why I chose all of those, because that's a component of a school, because you have parent community members each of them had their own vision of what the school should look like based on their specific need. And one thing, as a superintendent, that you do receive emails at 3 o'clock in the morning because people feel that they can send to you, and you politely, you might not respond to them at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you respond back and say, thank you for the email. If you would like to come in for the come into my office, please come in, or you want to do a Zoom, I'll have, those pieces, because a lot of times parents will be like, oh, you wrote me back. I'm like, yes, because I do value your opinion, but I'm just not going to send a message to you at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I will respond back. Because people want to know, are you going to respond back? Even the harshest a critic, they just still want you to listen to them.
Great, thank you. Ms. McAndrew.
Thank you for answering all of our questions. Here's one more. This is a question about special education and particularly about out-of-district placements. In Melrose, as elsewhere, it is our great privilege to provide a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive setting to our students. We know that sometimes that does mean placing a student out of the district, be it in private school or collaborative, to meet their needs. For many, many reasons, we would like to keep as many students as possible in Melrose, learning with their peers and neighbors. What experience do you have building or expanding substantially separate programs within a district, and what factors would you consider in doing so here?
One of my roles was assistant director of special ed in Waltham Public Schools, and part of the program was to look at programs from pre-K to 12. So they had a language-based program, they also had an autistic program, a connected program, several programs. And one of the things that I did do was look at what you call a change of placement process, which means you look at where the students been exposed to the grade level materials, but also their IEP, how the IEP is being implemented, and how is it being developed. In addition to that, looking at the staffing, because a lot of times when a student goes out of district, it might be because of certain certification of the educator. So as a central office and as a superintendent working along with the assistant superintendent of student services, you really want to take a catalog of name of your teachers, what licenses do they have, what additional license do you have, because a lot of times they go out of district because you might not have someone who's certified in Orton-Gillingham or a language space, or the data that we have doesn't connect to that piece, or we might not have the curriculum. So one of the things that I have done is work alongside with consultants, so that, for example, I had a consultant look at a behavioral program. So we had a behavioral program from kindergarten to 12th grade. What we realized that there wasn't consistency as you move from elementary to middle to high school. So during your professional development plan timing, and that's when we had everybody who was in the behavioral program or in the language-based program, they sat down together and say, what's your mission, what's your curriculum, what supports do you need in order to move forward? And so that keeps the kids more into district. And a lot of times when we go to out of district, our data might not be supportive, we might have documented. So one of the things as a superintendent of that is looking at your professional development time to see when did the new teachers who are special ed have time for compliance, what does your data look like, what is training for your paraprofessionals, so that you can keep students in the district by having that. And in addition to that, when you advertise for the position, you want to say, we're looking for someone who has Orton-Gillingham or Linda Mood Bell, so that keeps people in the district. And one of the things that a lot of times those out-of-district places might have professional development, where you send your staff to the out-of-district to Landmark to learn about the programs, and so you can look at what the programs that we have in district and what are the things that we don't, and so that we can build internal. So those are things that I've had, because when you get the letter from a lawyer saying we want to move the kids out of district, you really want to look at your data.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Withey.
You've started to answer this question already, but again, would love to just have us go a little bit deeper here too. What does it mean for you to have a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion? And how have you demonstrated that commitment? And how would you see yourself demonstrating it here in Melrose?
I guess my commitment for diversity, equity, inclusion comes into looking at our staffing. And one of the things that I have done is really looking at the questions and the advertisements that we have to say, please come into Melrose Public Schools. And today I was talking to a group of teachers. I said, you might know some friends who would like to come in here and say, this is a great place to work. In addition to that, having educators that were constantly learning about what does diversity, equity, inclusion looks like in our school district, and what does it mean. So, for example, if you're looking at making sure all kids are reading on grade level, what type of learners do we have in there? What type of programming do we have? And how does funding connect to that? And so one of the things I always say when it comes down to budgeting, you look at your data to say, this is the reason why we're having these number of special ed supports in each school based on the requirements of the IEP for that. Or if you know of acceleration that you want all kids to be prepared, you look at what programs do you have so that all students will be exposed to that. And one of the things that I can say is that you have a website so that it's a commonality. Let's all of us focus on that so people know how to retrieve information so that it's equitable. And how do we train people? To me, that's the most important piece.
Thank you.
So, I hope I can answer.
Thank you, Mr. Song.
I suspect this is the last time around.
Yeah,
so.
right.
You spoke at the public session at the high school around teacher hiring and retention. I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit here.
Okay. So right now there's a shortage of people going into education. And in order to retain staff, you really have to think a little bit differently. So one of the things that I have done is working with either organizations or Department of Ed where they have opportunities for schools to build your own pipeline. So for example, a paraprofessional going on to a classroom teacher who's already in the district, who knows the students, who just have to know how to navigate Department of Ed in order to become a certified teacher. And so that's one of the pieces is to have diversified staff, because when you look on the Department of Ed, if you don't know how to navigate it and how to do the licensing to take the exams to the classrooms, you need somebody to really guide you through. But the second component, too, is really thinking about when a teacher comes into the school district, what does your new teacher orientation looks like? Not just one day and that is done. You want to have a 2-year window so that the new teacher has a teacher that's currently in the building that mentors them throughout the year so that they have someone who's not evaluative who helps support that. And the third one, if they're diversified candidates, what does your equity groups look like? So they have someone who can come in who maybe not be in the district, but maybe outside the district to have navigate in the school district. But one of the key things I always say that you're constantly advertising, saying this is a great place to work, and so that people want to come on from there. I've always said that we are the greatest advertiser about what is great about education. And today when I met with a student, I said, why don't you go into education? Have you thought about it? Because sometimes people always say, well, oh, don't go into education. But I tell them, like, this is probably the best career I ever had. And there's so many opportunities from that. So those are things that I have had, that I have done. But also, the last piece, how to pass those entails. And I have put together for myself, and I shared with people how to pass the Foundation of Reading exam on mathematics. So here's some math resources so that they can pass the exam to become certified. Now the Department of Ed has different pathways to become a licensed teacher, but if that wasn't there before, you still have somebody have to guide you through the process. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Azutah.
So I'm sure that along the way today, someone has talked with you about this, but we currently have a structural deficit built into this year's school budget due to skyrocketing transportation and special ed costs. What's your experience doing? I know you've dealt with many budgets already, but how would you attack this problem were you to be selected and chosen, and then you decide to become our next superintendent?
One of the things I build the budget from scratch, so you can see what does the budget look like at this point in time, so that you can see what the cost analysis of that, so that you can look at the out-of-district placements, how much do they cost, but also too working with the mayor to see for that piece. One of the things I have done is work with building principals to look at what does your current enrollment look like versus what does the deficit look like. And how do you think about if we know that it's a $3 million deficit, how do you break apart that deficit? So it would be like $100,000 or $200,000 per building, so that they think about, okay, this is what we currently have, what can we do without? At the same time as we move forward. One of the things that I have done is, because because people say go line by line, but really you have to build it first to see what you currently have, because you might have people who maybe left the district who are hired at a lower rate, and so that you can figure out what really at this point in time, how much it's gonna cost, and then you look at the deficit from that. That's one of the pieces. But the second piece, when you know you have a deficit, is having, I call it, by November, you really put a hold on spending and say, we're gonna put a budget freeze, so that you kind of get prepared for the next year from that piece. And then those are things that I have done. But you really, people always think line by line, but you really have to figure out what it is at this point in time, because the number could change a little bit.
It's a moving number, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Broder.
So you've held just about every role in a system, from classroom teacher, including in special education, various admin roles, and obviously the top dog, the superintendent. What I'm very interested in right now is what you learned as a principal, and who do you see, not by name, but by example, what does a good principal look like?
A good principal builds a team around them, and they also to identify the strengths of the building in order to move forward. So for example, when I was in DeVal's, it was on the verge of being turned over to the state. So one of the things that I had to do was really build a team together and saying, we have this amount of time to look at our materials to move forward. So building a team together. So what we first did was I invited everyone, it was during the summertime, and I said, okay, let's sit down together, see what the needs of the building and how to move forward. At the time, we didn't have new ELA material. So we had to figure out, okay, until the district purchased like Reading Street, we had open circle or something, open court. And so we still use open court, but we focused on the standard. And so we provided professional development of a group that really wanted to learn and how to build upon that. But in addition to that, bringing families in so that they understand we're moving forward and these are the expectations, because a lot of my families were English language learners who worked in the fish house, who may be new to the country, didn't understand the parameters. So really guiding and leading the district, the building principal as to move forward, but also being visible. I didn't run so much. I would wear sneakers because the school was on a busy street, and sometimes my students did not take their medication, and you're out there running. And a lot of times people would say, well, you're a superintendent, you don't know. I was like, oh, I do.
I do.
I remember that I had my necklace over here and running down the street, or the student lived across the street, was late every day because was arguing with the grandmother. So the grandmother would call me. I said, call me, and I would go across the street to get the little kindergartner. I said, okay. The grandmother would give me the child, and we would literally walk across the street. The child would be late every single day. I'm like, where do you live? Across the street? So I literally went to the grandmother and said, call me at this certain time so that she could be on time.
Be visible and wear sneakers.
Yeah, wear vis-a-vis, and you can't wear your pearls and everything. You just have to wear that you're moving. And then I can also say, when I arrived in that school, clutter was everywhere. So my first summer, I had to work with the custodians to clean out the school. And kids, when they walked in the first day of school, they said, oh, it's clean in here. You didn't realize that the kids recognized that the facility was clean. And so my whole summer, I would come home with paint. I would come home because I knew that the school had to be clean. And when your staffing see you out there painting and cleaning and organizing, they join you too. So yes, I'm a superintendent, but I worked all the different pieces because when I entered into the field of leadership, my mentors were saying, your journey is going to be a little bit different from mine. And they were only responsible for the boiler. It says, you're going to be responsible for data, ELL, special ed, and you're going to be judged a little bit differently. And so my mentors have guided me here, and that's the reason why I had different experiences. When I was applying for my doctorate, I met my superintendent at J.C. Penney's, and she said, you know, you got to go back to school. I'm like, I don't want to go back to school. She said, oh, yes, you do, because if you want to do this, this, and this. So that's how I applied for my doctorate, because she was like, I knew this is what you want to do, and you have to be prepared for that. So yes, I had different experiences because my mentors said, your track is going to be totally different, and you got to be prepared for this track.
But the experience and the education, right?
Yes.
Tremendous, thank you.
Thank you. You've had a lot of questions tonight, so we're going to ask you if you'd like to provide some closing remarks.
Well, thank you for it. I've started at 8:30, and a great day to visiting with everyone, and I really have heard the rallying cry about whoever the new superintendent is, to bring people together on behalf of students. And my experiences over time has prepared me for this. And what I bring to the table is someone who works well with all various members who's had different experiences. Because yes, I have a doctorate. Yes, I have different experiences. But I do know how to sit on the ground with a kindergartner and listen to them talk. Because people want to know, can you come in and be part of the system? And I think that, to me, is very important to whoever comes in here, and that's what I've heard today. I've heard that we really want a program that is strong for all students, and we really want a superintendent that really brings people together. And acknowledge the interim superintendent who has been graciously guiding me around today through that. But I am somebody who constantly listens to people, who cheers people on. I always say I leave a district better than I found it, and that's always been my mantra.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Dr. Pearson-Campbell, and thank you so much for being here tonight. We'll be in touch after we meet with all our finalist candidates. And I would invite the community at large to please provide some thoughts and some reactions that you may have had at home to Dr. Pearson-Campbell's responses to our many questions tonight. She's been very gracious, and I would, with that, invite a motion to adjourn made by Mayor Broder, seconded by Ms. Rosie Thomas, and seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously, and we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.